Hi, Leslie with ArtInsights magazine and ArtInsights Animation and Film Art Gallery, and we're here and we're going to be listening to an interesting discussion with Mike Peraza, who has an amazing and stellar career at Disney. And so check out all of the information and fabulosity of his career, and stay tuned.
We have Mike Peraza here with us this morning, who's the mastermind behind all of this fantastic artwork behind us. So let's start at the beginning. So you were, maybe this is the beginning, but you were born in New Orleans, yes?
Right.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about some of your early artistic influences.
One of the things I remember from an early age was my dad taking me to the Sanger Theater, which was this grand old movie theater down. Back then they used to call them movie palaces. And they were showing 101 Dalmatians, brand new film. This is fantastic, and I loved it. And plus we saw a lot of, that's back when Walt Disney had a show, The Wonderful World of Color on TV weekly on Sunday. So we were exposed to quite a bit of Disney material growing up, which it was just fantastic. And I started sitting there drawing and being influenced by it pretty much. And just one day, later on, I jumped to high school. I was doing artwork for the yearbook, for the school newspaper, things like that. And my art teacher said, you really should look into this school out there that Walt Disney had started called Cal Arts. And so but there was an animation school or animation program. It was called experimental animation. And it wasn't quite something that I liked. My kind of heroes were like N.C. Wyeth. They were like Norman Rockwell. It was more traditional, conservative artists that had learned, to me, like the backbone of drawing. The teacher said, maybe you should look into some other fields too, because your stuff's very realistic. And next thing I know is he says, we'll have to set you up with a tour of the studio. So they sent me over to the studio, and that's where I met Milt Call and Frank and all, a bunch of the animators, the veteran animators who were over at the studio then. So they took me through, and I just went crazy because I had a love of Disney animation, especially everything they've done, TV and movie. But when I met these guys, and they were so nice, I said, I've really got to work here. And they offered me a position, and I said no, and the reason being, I was just scared to death. But I went back, I saved money up, I worked really hard, I just drew like crazy every day, just kept drawing, I drew everything, I did still lifes, I did quick sketches, I'd go to the local zoo, draw the animals, did a lot of studying on my own. And then I got a call from Jack Hanna. Jack Hanna was the dean of a brand new program called Character Animation that the Disney people were putting together at Cal Arts. So they invited me to the program, and I didn't have the money to go to it. I didn't even think about financial aid or getting it. So I said, well, I can't quite, because I looked at how much it was going to cost. I said, maybe next year. And so I did. I worked like crazy. Bussing tables. I worked as a commercial artist. McDonald's at night. Everything you could think of to make some money. So I had all my money. And then I flew back out. The next year I got accepted in the character animation program, the second year of the program.
Do you remember a specific of what, let me say one of those guys showed you that you say you learned from Frank Raleigh, or tell us if there's a specific memory you have about working with some of those legendary figures.
Well, one thing I mentioned from Don Griffith, because he was a great art director in the studio. One thing he taught me I've never forgotten was less is more. And another thing was when in doubt, leave it out. I would sit there and I would sit there and take my work home at night. I would sit there and work on stuff every night. I'd sit there and crank on it. And I'd look at it and go, I still don't really like the way it's looking. I would sit there and redraw something, do little color studies and bring it back in. And some of the older guys said, when you go home, take it easy. Don't work all the time.
Tell us, for those who don't know, what was your specific role in the creation of these films? Was it visual development, as we had learned about last night, or were you any backgrounds, or was it animation, rough cleanup? Tell us about your specific role in some of these movies, or all of the roles.
My main role on most of the films was just doing concept, doing a little visual development. In fact, that's why a lot of times you don't get a credit on a film because they come in early. I worked on films that were never made, like Catfish Band. I worked with Ken Anderson on doing some sketches on that, and worked with one of my favorite projects I worked on that may or may not get made one day was Little Broomstick. Little Broomstick was the story of this little girl who's going to have one of the worst summers of her whole life, and until she finds out she gets a broomstick in her hand. Next thing you know, she's going to a school of wizardry and witchcraft and stuff. And it was long before Harry Potter was thought of. There was work on a film called The Black Cauldron. And going to be this epic fantasy film. It was going to be, as they put it, the new generation's Snow White. So a lot of us were really excited about that. And we'd seen all the rough sketches that Mel Shaw had done, and which was a great, great concept artist. But when we finally started reading the book, The Friday Chronicles, and we read the screenplay that the studio had, like, wow, this is, because Tim Burton and I were both asked to work on conceptual pieces on it. And Tim did kind of his stuff about Beetlejuice in a way. It's kind of interesting. And they went, okay, thanks. And I was doing stuff that had like my castle was like made of bones. It was like an undead castle. I went, okay, thanks. What I worked on was like a little broomstick, and with Mel and Woolley. And then it came to the point where they said, okay, which film do you guys think we should do? And it was to a man. The older generation, the veterans said Little Broomstick. And then all the new people said Black Cauldron. And Cauldron was one of those films where I started working on it, and I was like, this is kind of a depressing film. Because at one point I said, well, can we have any kind of music or songs in it? Oh, no songs. And it's like everything we kind of suggest a little bit. It's like, no, we're not going to do that. And it's like you can have songs, you can have, Captain Hooker, Cruella de Vil, whatever. You can have a villain who can still be, just appealing and have fun and make a frightening kind of a thing with it. But they, exactly.
And this is a good segue into Little Mermaid, which you had a pretty big role in, and there's a villain that's very likable in sort of a diabolical kind of a way, right, with Ursula. Tell us a little bit about your role with Little Mermaid.
And Michael Eisner and a whole group of Paramount came in. These guys didn't really know much about animation. And Michael's up there in the podium. He goes, I'm glad to see everybody here today. I welcome you here to listen to me speak or whatever. But he said, Disney animation, this is a quote, Disney animation, I've always loved Disney animation. In fact, Heckle and Jekyll and Mighty Mouse are my favorite characters of all time.
Who said this?
This is Michael Eisner.
Oh my God.
And so I'm sitting there, Daryl Van Sitter's people are sitting there in the audience and are like, you can tell the people in animation, because the rest of the people that worked at the studio, a lot of them don't really know their own history.
Right.
But the people in animation were like, you can hear them go, oh, like the way you grown just then. What I used to do sometimes is paint little reproductions of scenes from Pinocchio and stuff. In those days, you go down to what we call the morgue. Now they call it Disney Animation Research and all these fans. You have to have white gloves to look at the stuff. Back when, in the day, you just either could call them and they would have somebody bring the things up to your room.
In a pile.
In a pile, yeah, and just kind of dump it. Or I would sit there and I would take things on, I would carry home what was left of the Snow White backgrounds. It might be like maybe about 25 backgrounds left on the film. But I'd sit there and I'd carry these things
In
home.
a pile.
Yeah. I mean, I'd literally take them under my arm, put them in a folder maybe, or squeeze them inside a book so they wouldn't get all folded up or something. Take them home and I'd sit there and copy pieces of them. And I'd take them to Claude and ask him, I said, what do you think about this? And he said, well, I watch how some of the cool is working in here. I think it's a little bit too abrupt, a little bit too much contrast here. Your pool light's working pretty nice, but you might want to work on this part, maybe badger it more. And so he would sit there, and it was you're being taught by these great guys. And so that was a lot of fun to it.
It's interesting because there's like, now that I'm looking at your work, I see there's a little piece of your past in each of these pieces. You worked with Tim Burton, you were born in New Orleans, you knew Claude Coates, you were the art director on Little Mermaid. I mean, there seems to be like a personal connection to each of these pieces. And it's interesting, it's kind of when you think about the authenticity of a particular painting and sort of what you bring to each of your paintings, there really is, in some small way, or in some cases a big way, a piece of that film's history in your work. Did you look at it that way for yourself?
Yeah, because like with Arrow, Little Mermaid is one of my favorite films. We were at a wrap party, my wife and I, for Basil Baker Street. And it was a great, great party, good food. And it was on the main lot back at the studio. And John Musker, John and I went to school together. John and Ron came over to my table, and he had a script with him. And he goes, hey, Mike, you want to, which, so John's going to see this. But he sounds kind of like that. He sounded old when he was young. Hey, Mike, here's a script on, I want you to look at Little Mermaid. Now, see, I'd grown up reading, Brothers Grimm. I knew all the old stories. I mean, the original story of Pinocchio, for all of you who haven't read Claudi's version, Pinocchio,
Dark.
he's very, very dark. And I grew up with these old illustrations
And
where
Little Mermaid's
he
dark.
runs away and he gets wet. He's swallowed by a monster, comes back, and he falls asleep in front of the fire. His legs burn off. He's like these oil paintings where he's sitting there dancing around these little stubs. And you go, you're a little kid reading this, going, oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, but with Little Mermaid though, they said, here's a script. And I said, well, how'd you do for the ending? They go, I just read the script. And I said, no, come on, John. Is it a happy ending? Just read the script. And the original story, Hans Christian Andersen,
Foam
if she
on
does,
the water.
yeah, foam on the water, she's got to take the dagger and shove it through the prince's heart and kill him. If you don't do that before the sun sets, then she will, actually die. So she ends up, I can't do it, I'm in love with him, and just drops the dagger, and so then she becomes foam on the water. And she's reading the script.
And that's the end.
Well, the script, the ending wasn't quite thought out, but there was going to be a fight to the death. I mean, in fact, in the script, we had, fight good versus evil and all this kind of stuff, and the prince will help, Ariel and vice versa. And so I read it, and then they said also Howard Ashman was going to be doing the music. And so in the morning, 8 o'clock, I had to report to Amblin, and I would work with Bob Zemeckis, Mark Hauser, and Joe Rapp, and we'd sit there and I was doing little concert pieces. And then at noon, if I got lucky, I'd get some lunch. And then I would go over to Disney Television. I was working over doing some stuff for that. Then at nighttime, I'd go home and I was working on Little Mermaid concepts. So we didn't have kids back in those days. Jeffrey was probably the executive in charge of what we were doing. And Michael let us kind of do, as long as Jeffrey liked what we were doing, he let it go. And Jeffrey really liked Christy Brinkley. Christy Brinkley was, as most of you probably know, but a very lovely blonde model on fashion and glamour magazines. But I'm looking at it going, blonde underwater, and especially this tan blonde. I don't see anybody living underwater with a nice tan. And so I went ahead, and our daughter was born during pre-production. Our daughter was born with flaming red hair. And I was just, when you look at Pinocchio underwater for that sequence, he's got the red shorts, certain colors, you look for complementary colors that really stand out and contrast it. And I said, if we have this red hair, as long as she's about the only red-haired creature in there, then it'll make her pop if we didn't want it. So they loved it. The only difference is the color models I was doing, they chose what I call chicken of the sea. And it was like things where the old adage at Disney is like, only present what you really want to see up there. And so I presented what I kind of wanted to see. What I really wanted was close to what Ariel was, but she was more the color of Cleo, the goldfish. I had more reds and oranges all through her, so she's more a kind of analogous color scheme throughout. And it was more, more goldfish. Her skin had a slight bit of olive tint to it, and which I was told, you're getting too ethnic. And so, and the reason I wanted it like that was because when she changed to a human, I wanted to see the kind of the flesh or pink come into it. So suddenly you see like a different species change or something a little bit. They said, no, just keep her like that. So it was, I like it, but it's chicken of the sea.
So what was your relationship like with Glenn Keane, being as he was sort of the guy behind the final design of Ariel?
We worked together. I mean, Glenn, Mark Ham, there's a number of people who contributed to the design of that. I mean, there was, on animated features, for the most part, you've got a huge team. I'd say Tangled probably was more just Glenn Keane than anybody. But other than that, most films, it's a real effort of so many people contributing to the designs. And then once you do it, when you do a still design, you want to take it so far, you've got to see it in animation. At one point in her script, Ursula was another mer creature. She was going to be like the brother of King Triton. And I was talking to John, I said, what if we do something? Because I'm a big fan of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. But I said, what if we had a part squid? And I said, if we have these tentacles creeping around, wouldn't it be kind of neat? And we based it somewhat. The final design was more Chris Buck than anybody else. I should actually bring the concept pieces in.
Yeah.
But it was based somewhat on Divine. I don't know if most of you know who Divine is.
Of course.
Yeah. So we based it on Divine, and Speedo kind of played down that part a little
I
bit.
assumed that.
But I've got some tape. We had a used car salesman who actually was full makeup, and he'd wear this towel around him. He sit there and act out the whole thing to the sound and lip syncing. It is hilarious. I should actually put that on YouTube. The castle we had, by the way, is which is over here. I really didn't want it because at one point, some of their early concepts were thinking of putting it up on a mountain. And as much as I love the Disney castles over the years, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, and everything else, it's always, even like Beauty and the Beast, it's stuck on a mountaintop somewhere. Tim, Steve. But I went ahead and I said, let's make it, right on the edge of the water. Because we had, story points and all. Where he's sitting there, he's going to be walking around with his dog later on. So, and they said, well, let's see what it looks like. And so we tried to do something kind of Mediterranean and a little bit of an Italian influence put into it also. And they liked it. At first it was strange because everybody was used to a mountaintop. And I said, well, let's just give it a shot and see what happens. And the weird thing was, like this piece, I spent just maybe about a day and a half or so. I didn't spend a whole lot of time on it because, and that, again, we were low budget. There was no schedule to it. We were kind of the forgotten film. So I had to crank it out really quick. And the sad thing is, as opposed to what they have now, that animation's kind of made a rebirth, Now you can sit there and you work on concepts for weeks and weeks and have a whole crew come in there and do things. Back then it was like, have you done that yet? I'm going to do it today. Okay, I need it